I'm Dan.
And I'm Mike. Dan, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I was taught it's very important to follow the rules. Now, often rules didn't seem to make sense to me, but I followed them anyways because I was afraid of getting in trouble or what the consequences might be. When you were a kid, did you break any rules?
Oh, yes. And I'm not proud to admit this, but when me and my brother were younger, we really enjoyed video games. So much so that our parents had to limit our screen time to 30 minutes. And they did that with this little dial timer. But every so often, we'd kind of game the system and add a few minutes on there when they weren't looking. So sometimes we'd be playing for like an hour and the timer hadn't rung yet, and they got a little suspicious.
Right, I imagine when you were a kid, you couldn't appreciate why they might be limiting your video game time.
Absolutely. And now I totally understand that healthy boundaries are important. You can't just spend your whole life in front of a screen.
Yeah, that's right. Today's big idea is that Jesus chooses love over rules. I think it's important that we unpack that a bit so we can really understand what it means.
Let's watch this.
What is a tornado's favorite game? Twister. Hey everyone, it's Alyssa. Welcome to today's God Story. So have you ever been in a tricky situation where you had to make a bit of a tough decision? Like take this for example. Maybe you're on the playground playing with your friends and someone falls and gets a really bad cut. They're bleeding and you're like, oh no, you were looking for an adult to help, but you realize no one's around. And so you know you could go into the office and get the first aid kit, even though you're really not supposed to go in there without permission. But if you don't do that, then your friend won't get the Band-Aids and medicine that they need. Now, what would you do? Would you just leave your friend, or would you break a rule to be able to help them? This is a really tricky thing. We're taught to follow the rules, and rightfully so, because most of them are there to keep us safe and healthy. But ever so often, we're in a situation where we need to break a rule in order to help someone or best love them. When we read about the life of Jesus, we see love in everything he does. We also learn that Jesus knew the truth behind all the rules in the Old Testament. We know that the rules are there to help people love God and love others the best that we can. But Jesus also knew that sticking to the rules exactly as they were written sometimes miss the point of why they're there in the first place. And that leads me to today's big idea. Jesus chooses love over rules. So before I go on and explain that big idea through today's story, I want to remind you that we're in a series called Love. And when we think about what does it look like to love best, we can look to the stories of Jesus' life. And we find those stories in the first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now today, our story comes from the book of Mark. So today's story starts on the Sabbath day. Now in the Old Testament, that was a day that was set aside as a day of rest, meaning that there was no work. This was meant to be a loving rule for God's people. It gave them a day to worship God, to take a break from their work, to get rest for their bodies. But because a general rule often isn't enough for people, there were very specific things about what was considered work and what wasn't. So for example, picking a crop on the Sabbath day was a big no-no. That's important for today's story because Jesus and his disciples were walking through a grain field on a Sabbath day. And Jesus' disciples got hungry, so they ended up picking some of the crops and eating it. So some Pharisees saw this, and Pharisees were experts in the law in Jesus' time, and they were super upset. They were asking Jesus, hey, why are your disciples picking crops on the Sabbath day? Don't you know that's wrong? Now Jesus responded to them by talking about something that King David did. King David was a shepherd boy and musician who became king of Israel way back before Jesus' time. The Pharisees would have known all about King David. So Jesus brings up this time that King David and his men were hungry, and they went into the house of God and ate holy bread. Now that would have been against the rules big time because only priests were supposed to eat the holy bread. Here's what Jesus said to the Pharisees next. The Sabbath day was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath day. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. Remember, Jesus knew why that rule was there. It wasn't just there for the sake of having a rule, but to help people rest and recuperate after a week of work. The Sabbath day was there to help people, not prevent them from surviving. When Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day, he refers to himself as the Son of Man, and he's saying that he's Lord over the Sabbath. He is in control over it. Another time, Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. The synagogue was a place where Jewish people worship, and a man with a weak and twisted hand came into the synagogue, and this man wouldn't have been able to do much work in that time with such a hand. Again, the Pharisees were there, and they were watching Jesus closely to see if he would break the rules and heal this man on the Sabbath day, because healing would have been considered work. So Jesus said to this man, "Stand up in front of everyone." Once this man stood up, Jesus asked the Pharisees a question. He said, "What does the law say we should do on the Sabbath? Should we do good or should we do evil? Should we save a life or should we kill?" But no one answered Jesus. They didn't say a thing. Jesus looked at them and he was upset because their hearts were so stubborn. So he looked at the man and said, "Stretch out your hand." And then Jesus healed the man. His hand was good as new. Jesus knew that the point of these rules were to love people, to do good. And so he chose love over the rules. Now let me tell you, the Pharisees were so upset about this that they actually started to want to kill Jesus because he broke the rules. But that really didn't matter to Jesus. He knew that choosing love over the rules was actually why the rules were created in the first place. The rules were created to show us how to love people. But people started to get stuck on the rules and they loved the rules more than people. We can learn from Jesus here big time. We know that following the rules is important because they're there to keep us safe, but they're also there to help us love well. And as we learn more about Jesus' life and study the way that he lived, we'll learn too how to know how to choose his love best. This is a really big idea, and together we'll need to keep learning what it looks like for us to love best in our own lives. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys, and I will see you next time.
Turn to the person next to you and see if you can answer the following question before the time runs out.
Question time. In what ways did Jesus choose love over rules in today's story?
So the rules were actually created to keep people safe and to teach them how to love each other better. But people focus so much on keeping the rules themselves that they forgot about the love part.
Yeah, and although the rules are meant to help people live in the best way possible, the way they were being applied ended up weighing people down and almost destroying life.
Let's take a look at the story of Michelle. An emphasis on rules is actually what separated her from God and her church community. Let's see how that played out.
I've been on a journey all my life with my faith, with my friends, and where I've lived. My name is Michelle. I was born in Kenya. I moved to Canada when I was 5 years old, and even in Canada, I moved to so many different places. I studied urban planning at the University of Waterloo, and right now I work as an urban planner. I love creating spaces and places for people to just live and be happy and be safe. Yeah, so every time I moved to a different school or a different neighborhood, I just felt very lost and just like I didn't really belong. I feel like my relationship with God early on in my childhood was very confusing because I would be going to church on Sundays and I'd be around very specific people. But at school, I didn't really have a lot of Christian friends, so I didn't really understand what that meant in terms of the friends that I should be spending time with, and just how God fit into all of that. I felt like I didn't really understand what my relationship with God was like, or what that even meant to have a relationship with God, because I felt like it was really only just Sundays when I would just hear more about Him and hear more stories about Jesus in the Bible, but that was just Sundays. So when I started going to university, I was already at a point in my life where I definitely didn't like going to church. And it wasn't until my third year of university when one of my friends asked me to go to church with them week after week, and finally, after just giving up and saying yes, I went with her, and It was such an incredible experience because it was a very welcoming and open church, and it just made me realize that churches could be a lot more than just very traditional, structured. It could just be more about community. It could be more about bringing people in and loving people and caring for each other. So I think that's when my relationship with God really started up again. Even when I was feeling super lonely and just very displaced, just moving so much, each time God was definitely putting friends in my life to welcome me in and just love me really well. And I think that's what he's gonna continue to do. Right now, I am in an awesome community at my church. I'm surrounded by so many amazing friends that have welcomed me in to their community, and I feel so loved. I always thought that it was all about going to church every Sunday, following the rules, and then you'd end up in heaven. But I'm realizing now that it's more than that. It's about living like Jesus and loving people and always welcoming people in and always making people feel safe. Even though I've made so many different moves in my life and there are probably still more to come, one constant is definitely God. He's been with me through every move, and I know he'll be with me through more moves to come. I feel like even though throughout my life I've moved to different places and different cities, different neighborhoods, and it was really difficult, I feel like now that I have an opportunity to create different neighborhoods and places for people to live in permanently and feel safe in and loved in. It's a privilege, and I just love doing that.
Question time. What one thing stood out to you from Michelle's story?
Michelle's initial church experience, unfortunately, isn't so unique. So often people think you go to church on Sunday, you follow the rules, and that's the thing that makes you a Christian. But they get frustrated with the rules and feeling unfulfilled, and they walk away from church, often walk away from God too.
And I'm so thankful that Michelle had friends who were willing to love her and invite her back to church. She found out that church doesn't have to be just about following the rules, but that when we focus on Jesus, we actually love people better.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that rules themselves are bad. It just means as we're making choices, we need to focus on loving first and showing the love of Jesus.
And we can do what Michelle does, create spaces and places for people to belong and to feel safe.
Yeah.
Let's break into our small groups and see what this looks like in our own lives.